الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على خير خلق الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن استنى بسنته إلى يوم الدين. Welcome to week 4 of Spirituality 1's Purification of the Heart. We'll begin by going over the questions from the assignment from last week. Total of that's it, 4 questions, 5 questions, 6 questions. 6 questions. Number 1, what steps should be taken when hearing a false accusation? We mentioned last week, admonishing the person that narrated to you the false accusation and telling the person that there was no need for them to convey this information. Number 2, avoid investigating the issue to see if it's true. Number 3, do not spread what you've heard. And number 4, make sure to not think bad of the person that was mentioned. Number 2, what are some common dangers of the tongue people fall into? And what are some ways to avoid those traps? Give an example of when you or someone you know fell into one of these actions, then discuss how you corrected it or how you would have corrected it, which is an open answer. Number 3, it says Aisha, the wife of the Prophet, made a gesture with her hand indicating that a certain woman was short. The Prophet responded, "You have backbitten her." What does this imply about backbiting? It implies that backbiting can be done not only through speaking but also through gestures. Number 4, what are some of the common causes which lead people to backbite others? The desire to be popular, envy, to elevate themselves over another person, that they have a grudge against a particular individual. Number 5, what are some examples of exceptions to backbiting? There are a few. In order to petition people to help prevent oppression or injustice, when someone is an open sinner, when warning others of the danger posed by that person, or when you are speaking to a counselor for advice. Number 6, Mustafa is in a gathering with some of his friends when he hears Ahmed make some disparaging remarks about his best friend Jamil. When Mustafa confronts Ahmed, he defends his actions by saying, It's true. Explain to Ahmed what the difference between backbiting and slandering is and what the ruling is for each. Support your stance by citing a statement of the Prophet. The difference between backbiting and slandering is backbiting is you say that about your brother which he dislikes in his absence, and it's by its nature it's true about that person. Slandering would be that you made something up about that person, that you lied about that person, right? The Prophet he said that if it's true then it's considered backbiting, and if it's a lie then it's considered slander. Okay. After that, that is about it. Where's the reading? Okay, so now we go into the material for this week. Last week we spoke about backbiting. This week the first thing that we'll speak about is compensation for backbiting. Not monetary compensation, but how to expiate backbiting, or how to expiate the sin of backbiting, right? We'll mention 3 main things. Number 1 is feeling regret or remorse. And then number 2 is repentance. And then so this is all under number 1. Regret, repentance, and a resolve to never do it again. Right? Even though it might happen again, but that you make a firm determination at that point when you realize you've made this grave mistake, that not only do you feel remorse and regret and you repent, but you make this determination that you will try your absolute best never to repeat this sin again. That's the first. Number two is, if this backbiting or whatever it is that you said, it reached the person that you spoke about, whether through you directly or most likely through you said it in the presence of someone and that person related back to the person that you spoke about. If somehow what you said, or you became aware that what you said reached the person that you spoke, then go and apologize to that person and show regret. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, whoever has oppressed another person concerning his reputation or anything, he should beg him to forgive him before the day of resurrection, when there will be no money to compensate for wrong deeds. But if he has good deeds, those good deeds will be taken from him according to his oppression, which he has done, and if he has no good deeds, the sin of the oppressed person will be loaded on him. So this is if it's reached the person, then apologize and show regret. Under that same number, this is number 2, right? We say if it did not reach the person, then perhaps in more cases than not, revealing it or informing the person of it taking place would cause problems. So don't inform the person, right? But still additionally, if you feel like that you can do a good enough job and the person perhaps will forgive you for what you said, and you know that of yourself that you can go to the person and show a level of regret and remorse and apologize, and more likely than not the person will apologize, then perhaps it's better that you go to the person, right? But in most cases, if it doesn't reach the person, you know that if you tell the person yourself, they might not forgive you, right? They might just be surprised at how you could say something like that. I remember a few years ago, I was performing Hajj, and it was actually the day of Eid, right? It was the day of Eid, and the way Hajj works is on the morning of the day of Eid, you actually don't pray Eid prayer, right? Because you're still in the rituals of Hajj. So on the day of Eid, we woke up in a land that's called Muzdalifah, and you head back to the area that's known as Mina, and what you do is you go stone in Mina. That's the first day of stoning, right? And then you kind of just shave your head or cut your hair, and you celebrate and, you know, just relax, right? Go perform tawaf later that day. So we were in Muzdalifah. We got on a train to take us back to Mina, and it was chaotic as it is, naturally is, and it's, you know, it's Hajj. And I was leading a group, so I had to be loud and kind of instruct the people to you know, exit, get on, whatever, move here, go here, whatever. Once we got back to Mina on the day of Eid, and the train was packed. When we got off the train, I was walking with a good friend, and all of a sudden, a person came up to me and tapped me on the back. Right? Turned around, didn't know who he was, and he was speaking English, but he had an Australian accent, right? So he tapped me on the back. He said, that, he's like, Assalamu alaikum wa alaikum salam, right? He was like, look, when we were on the train, and you were kind of instructing your group, I made a gesture to my friends that were on the train, kind of mocking you. So I just wanted to say, I'm really sorry, I didn't mean it. Please forgive me, right? And I was obviously caught off guard, like this happened all of a sudden real quick, right? So it's the day of Eid, I'm like, whatever, like I know I've done that numerous times probably. So I'm like, yeah, don't worry about it. He's like, you sure? I was like, yeah, like don't worry about it, right? And then I just kept walking, and my friend next to me, he's like, man, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. And what he was referring to was the fact that this brother, this person felt guilt, right? Obviously, they're performing this great action of Hajj, right? And everyone wants their Hajj to count, right? Doesn't want the reward to be diminished in any fashion. He's like, this person just came up to you because they said something about you, or they made a gesture about you, because we said backbiting can be verbal or it can be gestures, right? And you would not have known. You had no idea when you were walking that he did this to his friends about you, and you would have had you wouldn't have had any idea. But still, because of like, right, regret and him wanting his hajj to count, right, he was like, you know what, he could have just kept it to himself, felt remorse, regret, repented, right, and just kind of moved on, right? But because I think he was in such a great action of hajj, he was like, look, I really want this person to know, and I want this person's forgiveness, right? So, and to be honest, nothing special about me. I mean, I think I was just more caught off by the whole situation, and it was the day of Eid, and after you go through the previous day of Hajj and a few previous days before that, you're like, it's all good. Like I don't mind. Like I actually appreciate that you came to me and you told me that, because that just shows good character, and that shows true remorse and regret for something that you did. So we said the first is regret, and after regret is repentance and a resolve to never do it again. The second step was, if it reached the person, then to apologize and show regret. If it didn't reach the person, then revealing it would cause problems. But if it's also, additionally, you can add that if it didn't reach the person, and you feel like, it might reach the person, or you feel like, what I said about them was so horrible, and it's not true, or whatever the case may be, you said something really bad about them, you go to them in the hopes of reconciliation, that not only will they forgive you, but they'll completely not hold it against you. If you feel like that they might not forgive you, then avoid going back to them, or avoid informing them. Number 3 would be correct it. How could you correct it? One of the tabi'een, he said, compensation for eating your brother's flesh is to praise and supplicate for him. Right? So another way of also correcting it is to praise that person that you spoke ill about, to praise that person in a similar gathering to which that you backbit the person, right? So in a similar gathering, and also additionally to supplicate for that person, to mention that person's name in your private du'as. It's so dangerous, meaning backbiting is so dangerous, that when you want to rid yourself of it and the company of those who do it, you might start backbiting because of their backbiting. You might say something like, I don't want to be in their company because they are people that backbite others. Right? Because even freeing yourself sometimes from people that indulge in that sin can lead to a sin. You might say something like, I don't want to be seen with those people or be around those people because those people indulge in great sins, or those people backbite. Any questions? No? Okay. The next section is obscene language. Just give me a second. Let me blow my nose, but give me 1 minute. Okay. Bismillah. So the next section is obscene language. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, beware of obscene language, Beware of fuhsh. Allah hates obscenity and foulness. Tafahush. Right? The Prophet ﷺ, he also said, a believer is not a person who defames others. A believer is not a person who curses. A believer is not one who uses foul language. And a believer is not one who is obscene. Also another narration, it's when you curse the dead, it harms the living. Right? This is as opposed to, this is like, for example, cursing someone that has passed away. Right? It harms the living. An example of this could be, for example, one of the most staunch enemies of the Messenger of Allah was Abu Jahl. Abu Jahl, he died upon disbelief, right? Eventually, after a long time, his son Ikrimah accepted Islam. The Prophet ﷺ, he told the companions, don't speak of his father. Meaning, don't curse his father, because at this point it'll only harm the living, it'll only harm his son. His son has accepted Islam, his father was a staunch enemy of Islam. There's no point of cursing his father, because the only thing he'll do at this point is hurt our believing brother. Also a hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, if someone curses and insults you for something, and you know something about that person, meaning you know something about that person that you can return an insult with, then do not insult him with what you know about him. You will have the reward and he will get the sin, so don't insult anyone. So if someone insults you and you know something that perhaps the people in that gathering don't know about that person, something that's embarrassing for the person, something that definitely the person will be ashamed of if it becomes public, don't insult that person, right? Don't return the insult. Rather, remain silent, have your reward, and the person will be sinful for what they did. Now, without a doubt, obscene language is forbidden, and obscene language or foul language is when a person, they articulate themselves in a distasteful manner with very unreserved wordings. And what is considered obscene? Obscene is that which is clearly known as obscene in a specific culture. Right? Obscene language usually, for the most part, even in all across the board, throughout different languages, describes acts that are related to sexual intercourse or answering the call of nature in the most directive ways. If we think about obscene language, right, it usually revolves around these things: sexual intercourse, or a person answering the call of nature, or relieving themselves, right? And the way it is used is it's usually used to describe a person or a situation in an explicit way, rather than in a reserved and beautiful way. Right? Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu, the companion of the Messenger, he said, Allah is discreet and noble. He refers in the Quran to intercourse as touch. What he's referring to in the verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Ma'idah, أَوْ لَامَسْتُمُ النِّسَاءَ, that he's talking about, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking about a number of things, right? That if you do them and then you need to take a shower or perform wudu, right? In this case, sexual intercourse, a person would need to perform a ghusl, take a purificatory bath, right? But Allah doesn't say, if you have sexual intercourse. Rather, He says, أَوْ لَامَسْتُمُ النِّسَاءَ, that if you touch women, right? The point Ibn Abbas is trying to make is that even in things that are permissible, Allah uses language that is considered discreet and noble, right? And we find that throughout the Quran and even in the speech of the Messenger of Allah, they used metaphors and symbols like touching, for example, for intercourse, or entrance, or placing, out of modesty and respect whenever referring to these things. Right? So choose polite language over language or expressions that are considered coarse and unreserved. Again, the verse right there. Or if you have touched lamastum women and cannot find water, then use dirt. Right? Also, where Allah says, and those who guard their private parts. Talking about the qualities of the believers, right? Those that are successful. He says, and those who guard their private parts, furuj, right? Once again, being very, getting the message across very clearly, but at the same time being discreet and noble. Continuing on, also another example in the Quran. Those who swear off relations with their wives must wait 4 months. Once again, relations over here is referring to sexual intercourse, but once again, the language is noble and discreet. If they retract, then Allah is forgiving and merciful. This is talking about something that is known as li'an. What are the main causes for people using foul language? Why do people use foul language? A number of reasons. One, it's just caused by the person being vicious, right? A second is that person that is using foul or obscene language is intending to harm another person due to hatred or malice that they have towards that person. Right, so two people are talking, then they begin to argue, and then it gets heated, right? So the person starts using these, or one of the two people, they begin using certain words, right, to harm or insult the other person. Another reason, people are just accustomed to using such language from bad influences, from TV, from radio, from the friends around them, right? Because the more and more we hear it, right, and we hear it a lot more nowadays, right, we become desensitized to it. So perhaps the first time we hear it, we're caught off guard. But then the few times after that, we're like, okay, I guess, whatever, not my preference. And then the more and more we hear it, slowly it can become part of our language and part of our expressions. Also, another reason that it's used, right, is sometimes a person uses it to emphasize a point. That they're trying to, they're expressing, strong emotion or a story, and they want to emphasize a point, right? Or they want to gain attention, to show people that they're serious about what they're talking about. So sometimes they're used for a shock value, right? But the one that's listening, if they hear these words, they shouldn't give the person that attention that they're seeking or that they're desiring. A cure for it is for a person to remind themselves that the angels are recording every word that they say, and on the day of judgment, they will see the record of their deeds, right? Every word that they spoke, every foul language, every foul word that they spoke, right? And realizing that as they say every word, right, they are bringing upon the anger and the wrath of Allah, right? I mean, nowadays, right, it's very, very common, right, to hear it. If you go back 10 years, it was much less common, right? But now with this, social media and just the media in general and the spread of immorality more and more and more as time goes on, right, we become accustomed to hearing it, right? Sometimes you'll even hear young children saying it. Okay. After that, mocking and insulting others. Mocking and insulting others, and we're talking about this in the sense that when a person does this, and they have the intention to debase someone and ruin their reputation, right? What causes it? Once again, perhaps hatred, or just the person being mean. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, O you who believe, La yaskhar qawmun min qawmin asa an yakunu khayran minhum. That let not a group of people mock, deride, ridicule a folk, meaning another people, who might be better than they are. وَلَا نِسَاءٌ مِّن نِسَاءٍ. Nor let women deride or mock other women, عَسَىٰ أَن يَكُنَّ خَيْرًا مِّنْهُنْ, whom also might be better than they are. وَلَا تَلْمِزُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ. Neither defame one another. وَلَا تَنَابَزُوا بِالْأَلْقَابِ. Nor insult one another by using nicknames or bad names or insulting names to refer to one another. بئس الاسم الفسوق بعد الإيمان, that evil or bad is the name of lewdness after faith. ومن لم يتب فأولئك هم الظالمون, and whoever does not turn in repentance, such are the evildoers. Right? So Allah is instructing or commanding the men and the women not to mock and to not ridicule one another. Because He's saying that perhaps you're ridiculing or mocking someone that in the sight of Allah is better than you. Right? So it wouldn't make sense that you're mocking someone, you're trying to put them down, right? But in the grand scheme of things, where people's status really matters, which is the sight of Allah, that you're mocking someone that's actually better than you or has a higher status than you. The Prophet ﷺ said in a sermon to not laugh when someone passes gas, right? And the explanation that he gave was, why should anyone laugh at what he does himself? Like, why would you laugh at something that you do or that you're guilty of doing yourself? Now, the definition of mocking a person is to point out a fault about someone to amuse others. To point out a fault about someone or to amuse others. And you can add to this to point out or to mention an embarrassing thing about the person or something that they did to amuse others. It is clearly forbidden if it hurts someone. Not if you intended to hurt someone. It's clearly forbidden if it hurts someone. Doesn't really matter if you intended or not. Why I make that clarification is because if a person gets hurt, sometimes we say, well, I didn't intend to hurt that person, right? Well, you should have thought about it before you said it, right? If you were in a similar situation and someone was sharing a story about you, right? So it's clearly forbidden if it hurts someone. The exception would be if it's something they aren't bothered by, right? It's a story about the person, it's amusing, it's embarrassing, but you know the person themselves, right? They've asked you to share the story, or they're like, well, you were there, why don't you share, you tell the story better, why don't you tell it, right? In that case, it would be considered an exception because the person is not bothered by it, right? And mockery can be either, once again, through action or through speech, right? So generally we say it's forbidden. The exception would be if someone is okay with it, or someone for a fact that they're not bothered with it, they're in the crowd, they're in the audience, or in your group of friends, and they say that, like, why don't you tell the story? Like, it's a funny story. Right?
Does it just have to be speech? Like, can it be just visual?
What?
Like through the eyes alone? Because sometimes friends that are close can just almost make fun of someone else by just the use of eyes.
No, so we said it's action or speech.
Okay.
It can be action or speech. Just like backbiting, right? Now, if a group of people and two people or a group of friends are making fun of someone through the usage of the eyes, and the person is completely unaware, right? Then it would be greater of a sin because it's more similar to backbiting, right? And we said also about backbiting that it can be through speech or it can be through actions. Okay, we're good here. The next section is about arguing. And arguing is this section is a bit of a longer section. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and speak to people nicely, right? And the Prophet ﷺ, he says in a hadith, the most hated of all people to Allah are those who are argumentative fighters, right? This is referring to people that are arguing for falsehood, or they're arguing without knowledge. Ibn Abbas, once again the same companion that we referred to earlier, he said that even if the Pharaoh were to speak nicely to me, I would respond nicely to him. Malik ibn Anas, who is Malik ibn Anas, is Imam Malik, the founder of the Maliki school of law. He mentioned two of the major ills of arguing, or the consequences. He said that arguing, it hardens the heart and it sows hatred within the person. Hatred for the person that they were arguing with or against. Now, for the current discussion, we'll define arguing as to engage in a dispute without any beneficial objective. So you're just engaging in a dispute, and there's absolutely no beneficial objective here. Right? For example, two brothers or a group of friends are arguing who's the best athlete, or which team is better, or why they want a certain team to defeat the other team. Right? So there's no beneficial objective here. Like there's nothing that's being gained from this argument, from this back and forth. Kind of a similar situation was a while ago when you had this event, what was it? MMA, I think, right? I mean, not to comment on the sport itself, because the sport has issues in itself in terms of it being permissible or not. But there was an incident where all the Muslims were cheering on one particular individual against another particular individual. And after the fight ended, the Muslim won. He jumped over the cage or whatever it was, and he basically took care of business with some other guys that were related to the fighter that he was fighting because of insulting things that they had said, right? What happened? What was the consequence in terms of the Muslim community? Loads of Muslim people, they began arguing back and forth. Oh, no, he shouldn't have done that. Once the fight ended, he should have done that. No, he shouldn't have. And people got heated, back and forth. Again, what was the beneficial objective here? Like people ended arguing and you had two people or loads of people that were upset with one another. Because, oh, how could you say that? You don't understand the culture. No, you don't understand this. Oh, you know what he said, like what they said about his family, he had to go and defend. Right? But it was just back and forth arguing with no purpose behind it. There was no real objective that was being obtained. That this was this man's actions, right? He is liable or questionable for them, right? My opinion, your opinion about what he did is wrong, right? It's just that, my opinion. It's not like I'm going to go to him and be like, hey, this is my opinion about what you did. Who cares? He doesn't care. Why do you now hate? I'm serious. I saw people talking to one another online, whether on Facebook, on WhatsApp, and people were genuinely upset with one another. Like, how could you say that he should have stayed in the ring and not gone outside? Or others, how could you say he should have gone outside and not? And it was just this back and forth that had absolutely no purpose to it, right? So arguing means to object to another's opinion by criticizing the other person, their words, or their intentions, right? So arguing can include all of that. That you're criticizing the person themselves, right? In the argument, you call them ignorant, right? Or any type of insult towards them. Or you criticize their words, or even worse than that, their intentions. That you say, well, the only reason you're arguing this is because you have bad intention, or whatever the case may be, right? Or you're seeking something else. Right? Now, on the other hand, the permissible type of arguing would be to object for the aim of achieving some benefit and not to dispraise the person in speech. That would be a beneficial argument. Right? There's some type of benefit that's going to be achieved, and you're not, in the process, you're not dispraising the person or the speech or their intentions. Right? Elevating yourself or the knowledge that you have should never be the intention. Right? Arguing becomes or can become a sin when it either harms another person or harms yourself. That's when arguing becomes sinful. And arguing can lead to a number of the following traits. Arguing can lead to hatred. It can lead to anger. Definitely arrogance. You think you're better than the person that you're arguing with. It can lead to showing off. It can lead to a desire for fame. It can lead to delusion. And what arguing usually does, it causes a person to justify or to defend or to back up their views with whatever means that they can, and usually it results in a dispute. Now, the remedy for these type of arguments is for a person to reduce their arrogance. That prompts, because that arrogance is what prompts the person to show off the knowledge that they have, right? Also, what can reduce arguments is for a person not to be so opinionated, right? And realize that they might have one opinion, or the opinion that they have today, and they might have a completely different opinion tomorrow, right? So you can hold your opinion, right? But you don't have to convince someone else of your opinion, right? And if you want to convince someone else of your opinion because you feel like what they're doing or what they're saying is very wrong and harmful to them or those around them, then it's best to do so in private, in a loving conversation, in a manner of giving them sincere advice, but not to make a scene out of it. Also, when you're in this situation, think about whether the thing that is being discussed, is it something that actually needs to be corrected or not, right? And actually think about whether you yourself might be in the wrong, right? Think about the opinion that you hold. Is it a correct opinion, or is it just something that you grew up with and now you're accustomed to? So anything that opposes or contradicts it, you're against it, right? So ask yourself, why is my opinion be wrong? And when necessary, like I mentioned, like you need to correct a person. They've said something wrong. They're saying something wrong to people around them, or they're even convincing people of something that is wrong, right? Try to advise these people in private. Right? That is more likely to change their opinion. That is more likely to convince them and to show them that you love them, you care for them, right? And not to make basically a mockery out of them, or not to insult them or debase them in front of others by showing your knowledge, or basically perhaps even the stupidity of their opinion or their argument, right? Unless it is necessary to undo their harm publicly, right? Arguing is permissible out of necessity, right? But one must be careful that the harms must be careful of the harms that might accrue, right? If you argue with someone, right, you have to make sure that this argumentation is not leading to hatred of the person or a dislike for the person, right? Once when Imam al-Shafi'i, he finished debating a person regarding a religious matter, right, and the person began to walk away very upset, right? Imam al-Shafi'i, he went up to the person and he said that he said rather, can we still not be brothers? Like this argument that we had for a legitimate cause, because we hold two different opinions in Islamic law, should not prevent us from being brothers, should not affect the brotherhood, meaning that you and I, when we walk away from this conversation, we both shouldn't have anything in our hearts towards one another, right? So that hatred is not there, that arrogance is not there. Also, regarding a similar situation, right? It is known that Imam al-Shafi'i, he said, right? And this shows the humility of some of the people, of the scholars, the people of knowledge of the past, right? He says that whenever I was going to enter into a debate with a person, and when they use debate, they're talking about debates that are beneficial, debates that were in the realm of Islamic law, that certain person had another opinion, another person had another opinion, and they both believe that their opinions were correct, right? They would say that their opinions have the possibility of being wrong, right? Right. But Imam al-Shafi'i, he said that anytime I entered into a debate with a person, I asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow me, or to allow my opponent to speak the truth, for Allah to make the truth apparent on the tongue of my opponent. Right? And the reason for this is, first of all, he cared about the truth. It wasn't about winning the argument. It was more about reaching the truth. And the truth in this sense is what is most pleasing to Allah. Right? And also he realized that if he saw the truth upon the tongue of his opponent, it would humble him. Right? It would make sure that he would not become arrogant. And it would also prevent him or his opponent for having any hatred towards him. Right? So although perhaps someone of his knowledge, his stature, won the majority of debates or arguments that he involved himself in, right, he still made a supplication that I want to see the truth on the tongue of my opponent. Right? So Allah, allow me to see the truth on. So this shows us that he was going after the truth and not the person, and not necessarily the person's opinion. What they cared about was the truth. Okay. So our next section is debating for the truth, right? Which is a debate or an argument that is done for the sake of learning the truth, or making the truth evident, is allowed when there is a purpose or there is a need. Right? Now, most people who debate others, they try to trick others and sometimes themselves into believing that the discussion or the purpose for the argument or the debate that they're having is to arrive at the truth or to bring the truth to light. Right? But many times the truth is better sought during a meeting for purpose of consultation rather than in a debate. If you really care about the truth, then that truth can come out in a one-on-one meeting with the person or in consultation with the person, right? And not to do so, especially at a time when you see that the person that you're arguing or debating they're becoming heated, or they're perhaps at a time where their emotions are, they're extremely angry, or they're hungry, right? Or there are other factors, they're sleep deprived, right? And ourselves, we shouldn't enter into a debate if we feel any of those things, because we might not use our best judgment. Cooperating with one another in searching for the truth is something that is necessary. And to clarify the matter, there are certain preconditions that should be in place when one decides to observe or engage in a justified debate. What are some of those conditions? One, the person has to ensure that they've fulfilled what we call fardul ayn. They've fulfilled the individual obligations, right? Searching for the truth in any matter is generally considered a communal obligation, a fard kifaya. But there are certain things that take precedence above that communal obligation, and those things are known as individual obligations, fardul ayn, right? So for example, someone is debating a fiqh matter, a matter in Islamic law, right? But while they're doing that, they're delaying one of their prayers that has already come in, right? And the time for that prayer is slowly getting later and later and about to exit. The next prayer time is about to come in, right? Yet the person is like, no, we have to figure this out, right? We see in this situation that a person has delayed the individual obligation and preferred the communal obligation, when what they will be asked about first and foremost is the individual obligation, right? So making sure that you've fulfilled the individual obligation. Also, similar to that is fulfilling more important collective obligations first, right? So, once again, what we're talking about is prioritizing, right? Making sure that what you're doing is beneficial, but not only is it just beneficial, but are there other things that deserve more of our attention? Are there more things that are concerning to us that deserve more priority, right? Even within the communal obligations. A third, and this is a huge one, being qualified in the topic. So one should understand the argument that their opponent is making, as well as understand the evidence behind their own argument before engaging in a debate, right? Rather than just defending a position on the authority or merits of a particular person, right? Not just regurgitating something that you heard, but understanding both sides, both cases, right? And ensuring that you're qualified in the topic, right? Many people, they have Islamic discussions, arguments, right? And they'll argue day and night about things, and they're not qualified in the topic. They haven't studied it, or they haven't, discussed it with others. They've heard one opinion from someone, right? Which is a valid opinion, but because they were learning at a basic level, they weren't taught there's another valid opinion as well. So they're just presenting their argument, not understanding that, look, the person that I'm arguing with, they have a valid argument, they have valid evidences and whatnot, right? So making sure that you're qualified in the topic that you're discussing, which many times in our Muslim communities, when people have arguments that revolve around Islam or Islamic law or Islamic thought, people are not qualified in these subjects, right? Just like, you wouldn't ask an engineer or a teacher their medical advice, right? Just like that, Islamic opinion shouldn't be given by a doctor, right? Obviously, we're talking about if it has nothing to do with the medical field. Islamic advice should not be given by a doctor or an engineer or a technician, right? Unless they've deeply studied this particular issue or they've studied, the sciences of Islamic law, right? Many people hear one argument or one side of an argument, right? And they just kind of become convinced by it, right? And when they hear anything that opposes it or contradicts it, they're not willing to accept it because they're like, what I heard was the truth, and the truth cannot exist because I've never heard it. I've never heard this other truth, right? Or they become so deluded into thinking that they know everything, and then this leads to a level of arrogance, and then they start debating with the person, and it leads to hatred and whatnot. Also, addressing actual issues or ones that are likely to happen. So not sitting there and debating hypothetical issues just for the sake of debating. Holding these gatherings in private would be another one, or holding these discussions whenever possible in private. Right? A private atmosphere is always more suitable to lead to understanding and reconciliation, right? For both people, for ourselves and for the people that we're discussing a matter with, right? Private atmosphere is always more suitable, right? And even not just a private atmosphere, but in-person communication, right? That is more powerful than on the phone or through chatting or texting or social media, right? Humans were made to interact in person with one another, right? Many times what happens is people, they'll debate with others, but they'll act or speak in a manner that they wouldn't dare do in a person's presence, right? Because they're hiding behind a screen or a tablet or a laptop, whatever the case may be, right? So they feel more powerful. They speak to a person in a more disrespectful manner. But that same person, if they were in front of them, they wouldn't dare speak to them in that presence. Not because they're afraid of them, but just because they realize in person that's not how I speak to people, right? But behind the screen, very, very harsh, right? So a private atmosphere is more suitable, and an in-person encounter is also more suitable. Public gatherings, they obviously make the person that is being debated more inclined to defending themselves, whether they're right or wrong. A person might clearly realize they're wrong, but because of the public setting, they just now don't want to admit it because it'll be too difficult to admit it, right? Another one, and we mentioned this, desiring to seek the truth. That making the seeking of the truth your ultimate goal and your ultimate objective. Right? That the topic, the reason for discussion or debate is not winning the argument, but rather it's arriving at the truth. And it doesn't matter, as we mentioned, like Imam Shafi'i said, it doesn't matter whether the truth is spoken by us or is spoken by the people that we're engaging with, right? It doesn't matter who the truth comes from, right? What matters is that both people, that if they entered into this discussion with a sincere intention, desiring the truth, that they achieve or they try to attain the truth and realize it regardless of who it came from, right? And not, if the truth came from me, not holding it over the other person. See, I was smarter, I was correct, you should have listened to me. But rather, using that moment as a moment of thanking Allah for having the ability to arrive at the truth. It was mentioned that during Umar's Khilafah, he was addressing a crowd when a woman interrupted him and pointed out a mistake that he had made in his speech, right? Immediately, he accepted what he had been told and publicly declared that she was correct and what he said was incorrect. Also, another thing, and you find this a lot, is not preventing a person from modifying their argument in the middle of a debate or retracting something they already said. If you're arguing or debating a person and they say something, and then they say something a few minutes later that contradicts or slightly contradicts what they had said originally, right? Many times our nature is to call those people out. Well, that's not what you said earlier. You said this, and why are you changing your argument, right? This shows within us that we're not necessarily concerned about the truth, but we're more concerned about defeating the person, right? And if your concern becomes defeating the person, right, then even if you arrived at the truth, right, you've lost much more than you've gained. If your purpose becomes defeating the other person, right, and still you arrive at the truth, you've still lost much more than you've gained, right? Because defeating another person, and you've made that your point, you could have caused that person a lot of sadness, you could have kind of now sowed hatred between the hearts. So the goal shouldn't be to ruin the reputation of the person, rather, or to show that their argument was not well thought out or was fickle, right? Also, the last one, be willing to debate with someone that is more intelligent, right? This would mean that you would learn something in the process and your ignorance would be revealed or would become apparent in this argument or in this debate, right? Most people, they want to debate or argue with those people they know that they're more competent than or they're more knowledgeable than, right? Simply because they want to win the argument. Now, debates which are intended to silence an opponent or receive praise from observers, right, or to show off, are all things that are prohibited in the sight of Allah, right? If that is a person's intention, even if their intention is to seek the truth, but it is to seek the truth and to put down their opponent or to silence their opponent or to receive praise from other people, right, or to show the ignorance of the person that they're debating with, then these are things that are all prohibited by Allah. Umar radiallahu anhu, he said that do not acquire knowledge for any of these three reasons. Don't acquire knowledge so that you can argue or so that you can become proud or you can show off. So do not acquire knowledge for these three things: to argue, to become proud, or to show off, right? And then he said, do not give up acquiring knowledge for any of these three reasons: out of shame, wanting to not have to act upon it, or desiring to remain satisfied with ignorance. Right? So he says, don't acquire knowledge for three things. Don't do it so that you can argue with others. Don't make the purpose behind you researching something or looking into a matter simply so that you can argue, right? Someone says something and you're like, man, that's definitely wrong. I'm going to go research it today or look into it or ask someone. But you have this intention, like, I need to go correct the person publicly. I want to go embarrass the person, show them how weak their argument was. No. You should look up the matter or research the issue because you want to arrive at the truth. Don't seek knowledge to become proud. Rather, the more and more you seek knowledge should lead to more and more humility and humbleness. Right? That's why the scholars of the past, they said that when you begin seeking knowledge, you become arrogant, right? And as you continue on that path, you kind of become more and more humble. And as you continue further on that path, you reach a point, alhamdulillah, sorry, where you realize how ignorant you are and how much more there is still to learn. So sometimes you find scholars, they divide it into these three phases. The beginning of knowledge, person becomes very arrogant. They think they know everything. They hear one Islamic opinion and they think that this is the only valid opinion, right? Then as they continue to learn, they learn more and more and they become humble, right? They humble themselves, they lower themselves. And as they continue and they become specialized in certain fields or they gain expertise, they not only humble themselves, but they come to a realization of how much there is out there that they're ignorant of completely, right? So he says that do not acquire knowledge for any of these three reasons: to argue, to become proud, or to show off. And then he says, do not give up acquiring knowledge for any of these three reasons, out of shame. Because a person who has shame regarding knowledge will never learn, right? Ali radiallahu anhu, in another statement, he said that a person who feels shame of asking will never learn, right? This person will never remove the ignorance from themselves, right? Also, do not give up acquiring knowledge because you don't want to know something, so you don't want to learn something so that you have to act upon it. You're like, if I learn this, if I learn the obligation of this, then I'll have to act upon it, so I rather remain in ignorance. You know, this concept of ignorance is bliss, ignorance is not bliss, right? Or the last one is desiring to remain satisfied with ignorance, right? No one wants to be called ignorant or be described with having ignorance. The next section is useless speech. What we'll do is we'll break, a short break, about 15 minutes. We'll pray Salatul Asr, and we'll do this section, which is a long section on, it's useless speech, excessive speech, and excessive joking and laughter, right? So we'll take a short break, and then we'll come back and we'll do these remaining sections, inshallah. 1 second. 2, 3, 4. Okay. 5, 6, 7. Any questions? No? Once, going twice. No? Mas? You sure?
I do, but maybe I can ask it some other time. Promise I'm not showing shame.
You promise you're not showing shame? Okay. So no questions right now? Okay, good. We'll take a break, we'll pray Asr, and then we'll continue. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. Wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man istanna bi sunnatihi ila yawmiddin. Our next section is useless speech. And as you've probably noticed at this point, that yes, this is a class on purification of the heart, but you know, a whole lot of what we've been dealing with thus far deals with issues of the tongue and sins of the tongue and mistakes that a person, or mistakes that we perhaps make with our tongue, whether it's backbiting or insulting or mocking others, and we'll take useless speech and joking and laughing, right? There's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. He says, لا يستقيم إيمان عبد حتى يستقيم قلبه. That he says that the iman, the faith of a person, will not be upright, will not be correct until his heart is correct, right? And that's why, that's the purpose of this class, to work on our hearts, to purify our hearts, right? To know what the ills are, to know what are the things that basically blacken our heart, and what are the remedies for curing that. So he said that the faith of a believer will not be upright, will not be correct until his heart is correct. But then he added after that, وَلَا يَسْتَقِيمُ قَلْبُ عَبْدٍ حَتَّى يَسْتَقِيمَ لِسَانُهُ. That the heart of a slave or servant will not be upright and correct until his tongue is upright and correct. So we see that Prophet ﷺ is showing us that there's a direct link and relationship between a person's tongue and a person's heart, right? That a person's tongue is a manifestation of what's in their heart many times, right? Person may seem righteous, but at their moments of where they're experiencing a high level of emotion, right? Whether it be that there's a lack of sleep or anger or joy, right? Whatever the case may be, many times the person might blurt out things, right? That is not usual of them, or that don't usually come out from them, right? And that could be a sign that this is kind of what's actually in their heart, right? And sometimes the sicknesses a person is suffering from, the spiritual sicknesses a person is suffering from, they become apparent at these times of heightened emotions, right? Also, we learn that the things that we say, right, they directly affect our heart. They have a direct relationship in blackening and affecting our heart in a negative manner. Right? They can affect it in a positive manner as well, right? But, right, in talking about the ills and the sicknesses of the heart, right, many of those ills and sicknesses that the heart is suffering from, it's directly because of things the tongue has said, and the tongue has become accustomed to saying it, right? They usually refer to the heart as Malikul A'da, the king of all the limbs, or the king of the body, right? And they say that basically that the heart is the king, and the rest of the body, the arms, the legs, the feet, the eyes, the hearing, all of that are soldiers, right, to the king, right? Think of the tongue as like one of the main generals of the king, or the closest confidant, or the next in command after the king. If the tongue is bad, and if the tongue is just, the person might be praying and fasting and giving sadaqah and taking care of their parents, right? But if the tongue is just going at it in the different ills of the tongue, right, it's going to have an effect, a negative effect on the heart, right? And over time, the sickness of the heart will increase, right? Because the sickness is going undetected, uncured, no treatment is being done. So it's just having more and more of a negative influence on the heart, right? So remind yourself of, that's the reason that we talk about the tongue so much and the ills of the tongue, right? The next section is useless speech. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Mu'minun, when He describes the believers, He says, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ. Indeed, the believers are successful. الَّذِينَ هُمْ فِي صَلَاتِهِمْ خَاشِعُونَ. Who are they? They are those that in their prayers, when they're praying, they are in a state of humility and humbleness. And then the next quality, He says, وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنِ اللَّغْوِ مُعْرِضُونَ. They are those that who avoid vain talk. Right? So when Allah even describes the success of the believers, the first thing that He mentions is the thing that all of us will be questioned about first on the Day of Judgment, right? Our prayer, right? Immediately after that, the next thing that is mentioned is they are those who avoid vain talk, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also says, مَا يَلْفِظُ مِنْ قَوْلٍ إِلَّا لَدَيْهِ رَقِيبٌ عَتِيدٌ. That the human being does not say a single word or utter a single word except that there's an ever-present watcher over him, right? There's angels that have been commanded solely to write down our actions and to write down our speech. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, from the good qualities of Islam is to leave that which doesn't concern you, to not speak about that which doesn't concern you, right? A person can think about speech as a type of wealth that they have, right? A person can spend that wealth on something that is beneficial to them, or they can spend that wealth on something that will either harm them or not bring them any benefit, right? When you think about spending wealth, you can spend wealth then on things that will benefit you, right? Or you can spend wealth on things that will not benefit you at all, useless things. Or you can spend wealth on things that will actually physically harm you, right? So think of speech as in the same exact manner, right? Like a person that buys a knife with the intention to cut themselves with the knife, right? They used something that was beneficial or something that was created for benefit, wealth, but they used it to harm themselves. Just like that, speech is something that was given to us to benefit us, right? But at the same time, a person might use it or end up using it to harm themselves. And every opportunity or every moment of life is is time, or is an opportunity for a person to benefit themselves, right? A person can literally use every moment of life in a manner or in an opportunity to earn reward or to benefit themselves. Some of the scholars, they compare indulging in useless speech to a person who, they compare it to a person who enters a field or an area, a mine that is full of precious jewels, gold and silver and whatnot, right? And this person, they enter with the ability to collect so much wealth and to come out having gained and acquired so much. Yet when the person, they enter this mine with the intention or with the purpose of collecting jewels, all that person does is they collect dirt from the ground. We would say this person is foolish. This person was given the ability, was given the opportunity, yet they squandered it, and all they did was collect dirt. They'll walk out with dirt, not having gained anything, not having benefited anything, right? This is the example of a person who indulges or uses useless speech. They had the opportunities to say something of benefit, but they chose otherwise. And when we talk about useless speech, like useless speech in its essence is not perhaps something that is sinful, right? But it's just something that lacks benefit. Is that clear? Right? It's not something that is sinful, but it is something that lacks benefit, right? But at the same time, useless speech is something that you will have to be accountable for on the day of judgment. They say that whoever speaks much, right, his mistakes will be many. The more and more that you increase in your usage of words, expressions, sentences, the more likely you are to fall into mistakes, sins. Right? It's just that easy. You start talking about something, you start narrating stories, and you start talking and talking and talking. Very easily you'll insult someone, you'll mock someone, you'll speak ill of someone else, you'll backbite someone. So as a person's speech increases, their mistakes increase. And when their mistakes increase, their accountability on the day of judgment also increases. Right? So there's a direct relationship. Yes?
Useless speech as so is this used as a negative connotation? Meaning that you're talking, you're not really gaining or...
Yeah, you're not.
No,
So
you're not harming, but you're also not gaining. So you're just kind of...
yeah, so useless speech in the sense that you're not gaining, you're not necessarily harming. Now, many times, right, many times, scholars have strongly advised against useless speech because it's a pathway to basically sinning or harming yourself.
Can you give an example?
For example, I'm going to tell you a story of something that happened in my life yesterday, right? And I start telling you the story, right? And then I say, yeah, I'm just telling you the story. I'm narrating everything that happened, okay? It was a long day for me, right? And it was a tiresome day, and went to the beach and this and that, right? As I'm narrating, right, I mention a person that I encountered, right? I say, you know that brother that brother that we saw at the masjid, like he's always wearing these old raggedy clothes, he never dresses well. Yeah, I saw him, and then do you see what I'm saying? Like, then I continue narrating my story, right? So me narrating to the story to you, kind of unnecessary, unless there was a benefit that was trying to be achieved, right? Unless I'm trying to tell you an experience of something that I went through, and I want your help in solving it, or I want to warn you of something, but I'm just talking to you, right? Many times in this useless speech, you'll make a statement, or you'll make a side comment or something, where you'll enter into backbiting or insulting or something like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Is it kind of like elevator?
Huh?
Is it kind of like elevator talk? You're talking. Not really like... Well, you ask how's your day and stuff, but...
Yeah, so it's not like elevator talk. I get what you're saying, elevator. I mean, elevator talk is usually very, very short,
Yeah.
right? Like, how's your day? How you doing? right? Which is just, we would put that into general etiquette, right? This is general etiquette, this is good behavior, this is having good manners, right? You ask a person how their day's going, how are things going, right? So we're not saying don't socialize, right? Socializing is part of who we are, right? But also going through moments of silence and experiencing silence and getting yourself accustomed to remaining silent in situations, right? Because many times we're accustomed to talking, right? I mean, how many times does it happen? You're in a gathering, a group of friends, right? Someone's telling a story, right? Or someone's telling something that happened, and you jump in simply narrating the same thing that they're saying because you want to, you also want to talk, so you just jump in kind of telling the same story that they were saying, or narrating the same incident that they were saying. And the person's like, that's what I just said. That's what I just said. And you're like, yeah, well. Because many times what happened is that we've become accustomed so much to, we want to talk, we want to get the words out of our mouth, right? Sometimes it's because a person wants to be the center of attention. Sometimes it's because, a person feels like, they might not be relaying it correctly, or whatever the case may be, right? So a person says, that's what I just said, and you're like, oh, I wasn't listening. Because I was so engaged or ready to speak myself, I was waiting for you to take that pause when you breathe, so I could just jump in and swoop it away and make it all to myself and start talking, right? So many times in those situations, getting ourselves accustomed to just being silent, right? And realizing that generally that when we're silent, we're in a safer situation than when we're speaking, right? Huh?
Depends on the crowd you're in.
Depends on the crowd. In what? Of?
Because like in a similar context where like say you're in that friends group and like they're relating something and instead you're just silent, but like you don't really talk that much, but then it kind of like someone can use that against you and say, well, this person so and so doesn't like me, that's why they never talk. Or like.
Okay, I get what you're saying. But so making that balance between stuff that we say for general etiquette and to show people good manners, right? And that other of, the balance between just talking without benefit, right? You can ask the person how they're doing, how their day has been, how's their family, how's work, right? But when it becomes excessive, and what I mentioned is that we live in a culture where it's just like speak, right? And we're not used to remaining silent, right? So as I mentioned, there's no sin on a person who engages in useless talk, but at the same time, that person could have done so much more to earn good deeds by, saying something that was good, remembering Allah, right? And many times, not all the time, but many times, silence would have been better in terms of whether it was silence or just useless speech. Many times, silence is better. Now, obviously, there are times where speaking is better, right? And we talked about this when we talked about backbiting. That if someone's backbiting and you're going to speak up, this is one of the times where actually speaking is better, right? Or something is being narrated and whatever is being narrated is incorrect, and not only is it incorrect, but this misunderstanding or this incorrectness will cause people to have negative feelings about a person or perceive something incorrectly or something that happened incorrectly. Then in this case, perhaps speaking is better, right? But generally, silence is better. Or if you feel like the sister mentioned, that staying silent right now, right? The person might think I'm being arrogant, or might think I'm avoiding them, or I don't like them. Then trying to engage in speech, but at the same time directing that speech or modifying that speech in a way that could be beneficial. And also using our time to do more beneficial things, whether it's speaking more beneficial things or just indulging in things that are beneficial. Trying to make every statement have value. Trying to make every statement have benefit. Right? idle chatter, just useless talks, what it does, it deters a person, or it turns a person away from the remembrance of Allah. Right? Our hearts, right, when they're pure in their most natural state, they desire the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? That's why Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he said that dhikr, remembrance of Allah for the heart, is just like water for the fish. Right? For the fish, it needs water to remain alive. Our hearts, they need the remembrance of Allah to spiritually stay alive. Right? Not physically, but to spiritually stay alive. And the spiritual life is much more important than the physical life of the heart. Right? And one of the things that idle chatter or useless talk does, it deters the heart. Right? Like a person can, how many of us we can sit for hours perhaps and talk with friends, right? Just talk, right? And not get bored. But when we're by ourselves and we open a copy of the Quran, we'll get tired in like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, right? That's because we've spoken so much that it's now had this effect on the heart, where the heart is not conducive to basically taking in or spending time alone with the Quran. Right? There are 3 main causes why people engage in useless talk. Sometimes they desire to know something which is not necessary to know. People just ask questions out of curiosity. I'm just curious and I want to know. Right? Or sometimes they enjoy speaking with a certain individual. Right? Now, there's no problem in finding enjoyment in speaking with a certain individual, but that enjoyment should be based on benefit. Right? Or they desire to pass their time away to prevent themselves from falling into boredom. Right? And many times, once again, when all 3 of these are done, right, it can start as something that's just innocent and sin-free, but many times in the process, sins are accrued simply because there's so many sins of the tongue that are possible and that come out naturally in our speech. Sometimes we're heedless of it and sometimes we're not. The remedy for useless talk is to remember the purpose of life and to remember that we will be judged for every single word that we ever uttered, right? And it's also important for a person to train themselves to stay silent, right? The Prophet ﷺ, he said, whomsoever believes in Allah in the last day should stay good or stay silent. Say good or stay silent, right? 2 options generally he gave us, that say good or stay silent, right? So this kind of shows us that, like, once again, we're not saying don't be social individuals, don't interact with people, but have a balance, have some type of balance where you're not just speaking, right? I know we've all been in situations where we've come across individuals, and perhaps it starts off at a very innocent conversation, we're checking on each other, and then the person just keeps talking, and you're just kind of like waiting to get out the conversation. I don't know if it happens to you, but to imams it happens a lot. I'll tell you, it happens a lot, right? And people just talk, and you don't know what they're talking about. They go for like 10 different subjects in 5 minutes. And you just kind of like, and then when they're done, they're like, okay, I'm walking away. And then you're like, I'm not sure what just happened right now, right? But we might be in those situations, right, that where someone's talking and they're just talking, and we walk out, we're like, La ilaha illallah. I was just waiting for the opportunity to get out, right? But at the same time, when that happens, realize that sometimes we might be doing the same thing and not realize it. There might be situations where we're talking to people, they might even be close people to us, and we're just talking, and we don't realize it because the person is putting on such a good face and not being rude and showing a lot of manners, and they're smiling and paying attention, whatever. But when we shut our mouth, they're so relieved, like Allahu Akbar, like it's Eid, like it's thought that wasn't going to end. So just like people do it to us, there might be times where we're doing it, we just don't realize it because we're the ones doing the talking. We only realize it when we're the ones doing the listening, right? Because there's no output coming from us. Right? It's all input. Right? But when we're on the end of, right, when we're on the receiving end, we're like, oh God, right? Our patience is even less. But sometimes when we do it, perhaps we don't even realize it. People that are closest to us, we're like, man, this person just going on their rant today, right? And also to, before speaking, to reflect about what you're going to speak about, right? I think I mentioned, right, when we started talking about the tongue, this concept of think before you speak, right? And then the word think, breaking down those letters. T, is it true? H, is it helpful? I, is it inspirational? N, is it necessary? K, is it kind, right? So kind of putting these questions that you ask yourself, this reflection that you make before you speak. And also, and this is a constant remedy for many of these sicknesses, right? The Prophet ﷺ, he said, "أكثروا من ذكر هادم اللذات," that constantly remember or frequently remember the destroyer of pleasures, referring to death, right? If we make death a constant remembrance, right, then, we'll definitely reflect before all our actions, not just before speaking, but before all our actions. Like, is this the state I want to be in if I were to die soon? Or if I were to die now? Is this the state I want to be in, right? I remember there was an article I read about this person was relating a story that they lost a loved one, and it had a powerful impact on them, and it caused them to kind of become more practicing and take their religion more seriously, right? And someone went and visited this person. So this person, they lost a loved one. It caused them to become more practicing. Not only did it cause them to become more practicing, this person started volunteering. It was, I think, somewhere on the East Coast, volunteering at like the Muslim cemetery, right? Helping people when their loved one died, taking them through the process, the paperwork for their burial, and this and that, right? So this sister who wrote the article, she went to go visit this person that had experienced this life change, right? You guys with me? Right. So the advice that was given to this sister, so the person that changed their life, right? She's being interviewed, and she's giving advice to the interviewer. The advice that she gave her was, go buy your burial shroud. Go buy your burial shroud. Like, from now, go buy it. The purpose behind it was, like, if you go buy your burial shroud, go put it in a place in your house where you'll see it frequently. Perhaps this will help you remember death more frequently, right? So this sister who writes the article, she says that she went to the store, that same day, right? She went to the store, she went to like a Muslim store that sells like groceries and clothes and whatnot. And she got so distracted in shopping, right? She says herself that she forgot to buy it. Like, the purpose she went there, she forgot, right? And she was just kind of showing the reality of life, that there's so many distractions. She went there for a purpose, and she just completely forgot, right? And then she says basically months later, she kind of made this determination that I'm going to go back to the store and I'm going to buy it this time, right? So she went to the store, she bought a burial shroud, right? Just white piece of cloth, this is what I'm going to be buried in. And then she brought it home, and she was like, where do I put it in the house? Like, she was trying to find a place where she could put it in the house, and she couldn't. So she eventually, like, kind of running out of options, not much thought behind it, she put it in a place. You know how some people, like, they put out prayer rugs in their house when they pray, right? So she had like a drawer or a cabinet where she put those prayer rugs, right? So she ended up putting that burial shroud there, right? She says, now every time I go to pull out a prayer rug to pray, I see the burial shroud. And it puts everything into perspective for me, right? So having something like that in your life, right, where she was kind of saying that, look, have this in your life, because then it'll give you purpose behind your actions, right? Especially, for example, if you think about prayer, right, where most of us lack concentration and humility and staying focused, right? If you're at home, every time you're going to pull out that prayer rug, you're going to see a burial shroud, it's going to be like, that's kind of like, just put everything into perspective, right? Do I really want to rush through this prayer? What if it's my last, right? So constantly remembering death and remembering accountability. Um, and another remedy that we find scholars mention is for a person once in a while, right, to seclude themselves from time to time, or to set a moment in a day or in a week where they kind of just seclude themselves from communication with people. Now, it's not like 4 or 5 hours, just a period of time, an hour, 2 hours, and dedicate that time to basically reflection, recitation of the Quran, reading a book, something, right? But have a time, right, on a daily basis, right, every few days, at least once a week, where you're just kind of secluded. Right? Doesn't mean you have to go into like some cave, right? But just within your house, your phone's off. You're not going to check your phone for the next 2 hours. Right? The world's not going to come, crashing down if you don't check your phone, right? But just seclusion and getting accustomed to being silent. Now, obviously, this last one of secluding yourself, for people that are socially inclined, right, it's more difficult. But at the same time, it's also more necessary for them, right? Now, we mentioned earlier that, some people are inclined to be very, very social, and others are inclined to be very, very silent. And each one of them can be a test, right? The one that's inclined to be very, very social, right, their test is to remain silent and not to say that which is harmful or useless, right? For those that are inclined towards staying silent, their test is to speak up in the necessary situations or when it's an obligation to speak up, right? Or to say things that are good or of benefit to others or inspirational to others, right? But generally, if this remedy, when we talk about useless talk, yes, it's more difficult for those that are socially inclined, but at the same time, they are the same people that need it the most, right? When we reflect on some of the scholars of the past, some of the pious people of the past, we see that many of them, they were social people, but they had long moments of just remembering Allah and reflecting and reading books and, just, for example, there was one scholar who basically wouldn't socialize much. He would do that which was necessary, and then he would just kind of seclude himself after each obligatory prayer. So the people asked him, you don't spend time with this, right? He's like, so he responded, he's like, I'm spending time with Prophet ﷺ and his companions. He meant I'm just reading a hadith. I'm just learning a hadith. And I'd rather spend time with Prophet ﷺ and his companions than, basically nothing against you guys, but kind of just sit here and talk about that which is not beneficial. I'd rather just spend time with the Prophet and learn his statements, his way, his character, his sunnah. Right? And if we look at some of the achievements of, especially the scholars of the past, right, and the amount of stuff that they accomplished, some of them living very short lives, right? Some of them writing tremendous amounts of, just knowledge and fiqh and hadith, whatever they wrote, right? Just leaving an immense knowledge, a plethora of knowledge behind, right? It's not because they had, 36-hour days. It's not because, they didn't have phones. It's just that they found a way to make benefit of their time, right? There were ways, perhaps there are more ways to distract ourselves nowadays, right? But there were people that lived even during every generation that they found a way to keep themselves distracted, to keep themselves preoccupied with things that are less important, right? But it's just that those people that, studied or were pious or wrote all this knowledge, they just found a way, they found a balance to only engage in that which benefits them, right? Yes, it seems like it's much harder during our times with so much at our fingertips, right? There's literally, you can literally just spend 4 or 5 hours just sitting on a couch on your phone, right? Going from YouTube to Netflix to social media, to responding to a few messages, right? And sometimes we're like, and that's why you find in our times we make the statement, we're like, it's already 11 o'clock? It's already midnight? right? Because we've lost the ability to keep track of time, because we're just, engaging in so many useless things, right? We're like, man, it's already 12 o'clock, I didn't get anything done, right? When we find that in certain periods of our life, in 30 minutes we could get like a whole bunch accomplished because we were just focused. I mean, think about how many of you still in college right now? College? You? No? No one else? Done? I mean, this concept of finals week, right? People study like, Maz, how much? How many hours for final? Roughly. Hard subject.
I don't know, dude. Like maybe
Give me like a ballpark.
10 hours, like 4 hours a day.
4 hours a day?
Yeah, like if my final's like Wednesday,
Uh-huh.
I'll start studying like Monday.
Okay.
So like Monday I'll put in like 4 hours, and then like Tuesday I'll put in like 4 hours.
Okay, so you put 8 hours of studying in 2 days.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else want to share their
I'm
experience?
a bad example. But
Okay, it's all good. Anyone else want to share their experience? No?
Maybe like 5 hours Monday. My exam was on Wednesday, and then Tuesday would be like 10 hours. It would increase.
So like 15 hours in 2 days. 15 hours in 2 days. Perfect. Okay. We say, right, just let's say, after 15 hours, or let's just use your example because it's lower, 4 and 4, right? Let's just use 8 hours. Usually after 8 hours, you're not retaining everything that you studied, but there's a lot of information that you've gained in those 8 hours, correct? Right? Now, it's not sustainable. That lifestyle is not sustainable, right? But let's say, hypothetically, right? If you studied something, one subject, right? Whether it's related to the world or related to Islam, right? 1 hour a day. 1 hour a day. Not 4, not 5 and then 10. Literally 1 hour a day, right? 7 hours a week. On a consistent basis, right? How much knowledge you'd come out with. Week after week after week. Right? I mean, if you think about people that, pursue higher studies, medical school, they just study. Right? They just really apply themselves, right? They do it for a period of time, but if a person did a small portion on a consistent basis, right? I mean, think about how much they could acquire. I think it was last week, perhaps, or the week before that, I talked about memorizing the Quran, right? It's not something a person does, I'm memorizing the Quran today, Bismillah, right? No, it's small steps, it's baby steps. It's literally like a kid starts, he's memorizing like 2 lines. That's all he can memorize. And he dedicates like an hour to it, 2 lines. He's like, this is so hard. The next month he's memorizing 5 lines. And he stays at 5 lines for another few months. But he does it consistently, right? Then a few months later, second year, they got a page. In that same hour that they're dedicating, they got a page. And as I mentioned, as they get towards the end, within an hour, they're like knocking out 2 pages. It's like, I got this right now. It's like, oh, did it. Still got 15 minutes left, right? But it's these small steps, right? It's these doing it, using your time beneficially and doing it on a consistent basis, right? I was always, I'll be honest, even myself when I studied Islamic studies, right? And finals week would come around, and I've been studying what our biggest subject was fiqh and comparative fiqh, right? It's like you got to remember who said what and why they said what and the evidences, and we study for sometimes for our Islamic law class, which was one of our main classes, right? We would study 4 or 5 days, right? But after 4 or 5 days, I'm like, man, I'm faqih right now. I'm a jurist right now. I know there's so much. And I would think about, I was like, man, subhanAllah, if I just dedicated an hour and a half each day, I would I could gain so much knowledge, right? But just finding a way to make benefit of our time. Ibrahim at-Taymi, he says, when the believer wants to speak, he first thinks deeply. If it is correct, he speaks. Otherwise, he stays silent. On the other hand, a foolish person has a loose tongue. Umar radiallahu anhu, he said, or sorry, this is Abdullah ibn Umar. He says, my fear is that I will indulge in vain, my fear that I will indulge in vain talk prevents me from speaking much. That he's saying that I have a fear that I will indulge in vain talk. And my vain talk, that fear, it prevents me from speaking much. Now we said generally vain talk is not something that is sinful. But he's saying this realizing that as the door for vain talk opens, it usually leads to the door of these other sins that we've talked about. The next section is a section on excessive speech, right? Excessive speech is to talk more than necessary. The example that's given sometimes is that people, when they have money, right, they don't spend their excess money freely, right? But people, when they have words, they're willing to pronounce or utter their speech, their excess speech very freely. Although when we think about both money and speech, they're both a form of capital, right? Money, you can use it in this world to benefit you, and you can use it for the next to benefit you. And speech, the same, right? Your excess speech can be something that harms you, or it can be something that benefits you. Now, excess speech in general, it may not be considered also a sin, but it is disliked when there's no need or there's no benefit. Now, the difference between excessive speech and useless speech, because the previous section was useless speech, right? Excessive speech, right, refers to the mode of expression. Right? Refers to the mode of expression. And useless speech, it more refers to the subject matter itself. So useless speech, like the entire subject matter is useless. Excessive speech is speech that perhaps was necessary, but you're just being excessive with your words. Like you could have said the same thing in 5 words, but you use like 25 words. Right? That's why, for example, one of the miracles the Prophet ﷺ was given, he says, "Utitu jawami al-kalim," that I was given comprehensive speech. What is meant by comprehensive speech was that he was given the ability to say a few words that had much meaning, right? Or that many benefits could be extracted from. That's why you find books of hadith and then you find explanations of these hadith, and so many benefits or lessons can be derived from these short statements of the Messenger of Allah. Many of the hadith of the Prophet, they're very short, right? But the amount of benefit that can be derived from them is so great. Now, this was a miracle that was given to the Prophet ﷺ, to him specifically, right? And yes, we haven't been given that miracle, but we should embody that, or try to embody that sunnah. Right? Say that which is necessary, right? We don't have to expand on everything. Right? When someone tells you, you want to tell someone about your day because you're just conversing with them, it's fine, right? But so I woke up at 7 in the morning because the alarm went off twice because the previous night I had set 3 alarms, right? And then I woke up and I was tired, and then I wanted to eat breakfast, but there was nothing to eat. Like, dude, you woke up and you ate breakfast. Like, can we get to where your day was going, right? But you're giving every detail. Just get to the point. You know the whole concept of, we say this, get to the point? That's because the subject matter usually in these cases is something that perhaps is beneficial, or you ask the person a question, right? But they give you every little detail, right? Hey, I see, hey, I heard you got a new phone. I'm looking to get a new phone. Can you tell me, where you got a new phone from, a new car? Well, see, this is what happened. My old phone, it was started acting up, and then the screen broke, and then I was I was going back and forth. I need a new phone, and I tried to save up some money, so I went to the store, and the representative was really mean. I was like, dude, I didn't ask you all that. Just tell me about why you chose this phone or whatever. Get to the point, right? That's what's being intended here, right? So that's the difference. Useless speech is the subject matter is of no benefit, right? Excessive speech is the mode of expression. Now, one of the ways to test yourself for both or for even this is, sometimes we find within us, right? And the next time you're in a conversation with a group of people, right, we find within us this urge, and check yourself, that you find this urge that you want to say something, you want to speak, right? try at those times sometimes to remain silent. When it's not necessary to speak, just try to remain silent. Right? If there's someone else that can say what we wanted to say, there's no reason for us to speak. Right? Amr ibn Dinar, he says that a man talked too much in front of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to him, "How many barriers does your tongue have?" So the man, he said, "Two, my lips and my teeth." So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam replied, "Are they not sufficient?" Meaning, are they not sufficient from preventing you from speaking? One of the scholars of the past, he said that there are two things that can easily destroy a person: excessive wealth and excessive speech. That both of these things, they very easily lead to a destruction of the person. That's why we find many scholars of the past, not that having excessive wealth is not allowed, but they advised against it. Why did they advise against it? Not because in itself it is something that is permissible. Wealth is not something that is by its innate nature impermissible or permissible. What makes it either of those two situations, or even disliked or liked, is how a person uses it, right? But they advise against excessive wealth because usually it leads to a person becoming corrupt, becoming immoral, right? And the other thing is, they advise was staying silent, because excessive speech usually leads to the destruction of the person by destroying the person's heart. And once the person's heart is destroyed, then the person cannot rectify themselves, or the person will have a lot of difficulty rectifying themselves. The last section is excessive joking and laughter. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, لو تعلمون ما أعلم لضحكتم قليلا ولبكيتم كثيرا. That if you knew what I knew, or if you knew what I know, you would have laughed little and wept much. Right? The problem with joking and laughter, and we're talking about excessive joking and laughter, it has the ability to harden the heart. The Prophet ﷺ, he says in one narration, he says, وَلَا تُكْثِرُ الضَّحِكِ. Do not be excessive in your laughter. فَإِنَّ كَثْرَةِ الضَّحِكِ تُمِيتُ الْقَلْبِ. Because excessive laughter, it kills the heart. It removes life from the heart, meaning the spiritual life of the heart. So joking and laughter is disliked when it becomes excessive. And when a person becomes excessive in their laughter or in their joking, it removes a person's reason. It diminishes their intellect. Right? The same way like wine and anger, they diminish the person's ability to think and to function properly. Many times excessive laughter and joking can do the same thing to a person. It can be like a drug. Right? It also has the ability to remove respect and admiration that people may have for a person that jokes a lot. Right? And another danger is sometimes people use laughter and joking to amuse others or to impress others, right? And what they'll usually fall into is they'll make up stories or they'll exaggerate facts, and the list goes on and on.
You said that it kills the heart. What do you mean by that? Like, is it content or the thing that they're laughing at?
No, it kills the spiritual life of the heart. See, the life of the... See, we said... Remember we gave the example, we said that the remembrance of Allah, right? Remembrance of Allah to the heart is like water is to the fish.
Yeah.
Right? When there's excessive laughter and excessive joking, what it's doing, it's completely taking the heart away from the remembrance of Allah. Right? It's detaching it. Right? When it completely detaches it from the remembrance of Allah, it essentially has killed the heart. Right? So it first hardens the heart, and when it becomes extremely excessive, right, it has the ability to kill the spiritual life of the heart. Kill the spiritual life of the heart. Now, like the heart it'll either become impossible or very, very difficult for the heart to reconnect back to Allah, or reconnect back to the remembrance of Allah, or to recitation of the Quran. So it'll remove the heart from its its actual purpose. Joking is allowed as long as it does not hurt anyone, as long as you're not insulting anyone, and it's not excessive. The Prophet ﷺ, he would sometimes joke with the companions, and they would say, "O Messenger of Allah, you joke with us?" He said, "I do joke with you, but I say nothing but the truth." That even in my jokes, they are the truth, right? And there are a few examples of the Prophet ﷺ's joking. Now, what the Prophet ﷺ would do is he would joke many times by using literal speech, right? So once he called a person, he said, "Hey, you with 2 ears," right? Now it sounds like it sounds like but every person has 2 ears, right? Once the Prophet ﷺ, he told an old woman, right? This old woman said, "Make dua that I enter paradise." The Prophet ﷺ said, "Old women will not enter paradise." She became extremely distressed, right? What's going on, right? And then he clarified, he said that, you won't be old when you enter paradise, right? So these are all jokes, right, where they're not excessive, right? Even her crying or her becoming sad was not intended. The joking of the Prophet ﷺ usually was done with people to show them love, to show them care, to show them compassion, right? There's a companion by the name of Zahir ibn Haram. Zahir ibn Haram, what's narrated about him is that he basically had deformities in the way that he looked. Literally, the narrations say that his physical appearance was repulsive. And they don't mention this as a term of backbiting, but just to kind of understand the situation, they say that his physical appearance was repulsive. That was the way he was created, and this was a test for him, right? And once when Zahir was in the marketplace selling some goods that he had, the Prophet ﷺ, he came up from behind Zahir and he grabbed Zahir and he said, "Who will buy this slave of mine?" Right? Now Zahir was a free man. Zahir is like, "What's going on? I'm not trying to be sold," right? And then he realizes it's the Prophet that's basically just having fun with him, right? And then Zahir, he says, "O Messenger of Allah, if you sell me, you'll find me to be very cheap. Like you won't make profit." Like basically this shows that he suffered from low self-confidence because of the way he looked, right? How does the Prophet ﷺ respond? He says, "But with Allah, you're very, very expensive. You're very, very valuable," right? So once again, the purpose of the joke was to lift the spirits, right? Many times when we joke, right, when we talk about it's to put them down. Almost all the time we find the joking of the Prophet ﷺ, it was simply just to kind of either lift the spirits, show compassion, love and care, or just to be friendly with the person, right? Ayman, she once said to the Prophet ﷺ, she went to the Prophet, she said, "My husband, wants to talk to you, is calling you." The Prophet ﷺ, he responded, he said, "Like who? Like who's your husband? Is he the one who has whiteness in his eyes?" And she said, "I swear by Allah, he doesn't have that." Right? Immediately she thought, is he thinking that my husband is someone who has a sickness in his eyes? Right? He said, "Yes, he does." She said, "No, I swear he doesn't." And then he said, "Everyone has some whiteness in their eyes." Right? So it's just practical usage of words, just kind of being friendly, right? A woman asked the Prophet, "Let me ride on one of the camels." He said, "Okay, but I will give you the child of a she-camel." Meaning I'll give you, now literally you'll think, okay, he'll give me a baby camel. And so she responded, she said, "What good will that do? Like what can I do with that?" And he said, "Isn't every camel the child of another camel?" Right? It was just a play on words, right? And this is what we find, that he was always truthful in his speech, but he was just using a play on words, right? There's a narration of the companion Suhaib al-Rumi. He was eating dates, and when he was eating dates, one of his eyes was inflamed. So he had been told that, for the time being, when one of these eyes is inflamed, don't eat dates. Don't currently eat dates because of this inflammation of the eye, right? So the Prophet ﷺ, he said to him, he said, "You're eating dates while you have this eye condition, you're not supposed to be eating dates right now, right?" So Suhaib responded, now Suhaib is joking with the Prophet ﷺ. He said, "Yeah, but I'm eating it with the other eye." Right? Right? So the Prophet ﷺ, he just smiled and his face lit up. Right? Even the narrations of the laughter of the Prophet ﷺ, we don't find narrations of the Prophet ﷺ like bursting out in laughter. Right? Usually his laughter was just a huge smile. Right? We don't find any narrations of the Prophet ﷺ just bursting out in laughter. Right? And that was generally something in the past that was seen as something that's not praiseworthy. Not laughing in itself, but just bursting out in laughter with a loud voice. Right? That was generally seen as something. But laughing, smiling, right? There's no issue with that, right? But this point of excessive laughter and excessive joking, right? The last thing that we'll mention is some conditions that should be observed when joking, right? One, it should not be a lie. It should never be a lie, right? It should not be something that harms someone. Right? We don't make fun of people, especially what we find very common today is making fun of a person's creation, right? We talked about this last week. When you do that, you're essentially making fun of the creator and not the creation. So one, it should not be a lie. It should not harm anyone. It should not be out of place, right? Like joking and laughter has its appropriate places. Remember, a brother was telling me a few weeks ago that his father was in the hospital and was sick, and someone came to visit. This guy who came to visit was just like joking about, random stuff. And the guy was like, and the guy whose father it was like, this kind of awkward, like, dude, like, I think it's the proper place right now, right? So it shouldn't be out of place. Go visit someone at the hospital or someone that's grieving and you start cracking jokes or something, right? Or there's a serious conversation going on, or it's a circle of knowledge and you're just kind of like cracking jokes left and right? Because first of all, you're taking away from whatever's going on. Third, you're preventing, let's say it's a gathering of knowledge, you're preventing other people from benefiting. And perhaps more importantly is you're making yourself look bad. You're ruining your own reputation and your own honor, right? And the last, as we mentioned, is that it should not be excessive. Any questions? Yes.
In the instance for, I think it was like the third one, where it shouldn't be out of place,
Mm-hmm.
the hospital example, like what if the intention is to go and cheer up the family members?
So good question. You go to the hospital. What if the purpose is to cheer up the family members? It really matters what the situation is, right? If it's death, major surgery, terminal illness, cancer, something like that, right? Not proper time, right? Someone broke their arm, someone got a little accident, and you're trying to cheer up the person, and you have that relationship with the person, yeah, then that's different, right? So, like I said, right, we cannot give a blanket statement, right? But if we were to generalize, generally the hospital is not a place that you joke, right? Unless it's like the birth of a child or something like that. There's different, things. But like death, major surgery, illness, some major illness, something like that, you avoid it.
I had a question in regards to I guess work, casual talk.
Mhm.
Sometimes, I guess I'm at work and they ask me, well, how's your day, right? I mean, in one day, my day wasn't so good. I woke up stressed out more.
Mhm.
But I said my day's it's good, it's going good. Technically, I lied, meaning that. So they asked me how good my day, because I feel like the situation doesn't call for. I feel like they know that I know that they're just asking how good man is,
Mhm.
but it's not really interested in what I'm trying to.
So I get what you're saying. So you could just make your intention like, look, although you're stressed out, your day is not going good, but it's still good compared to many others, compared to many other people. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Right? So just kind of changing the intention when you say it. Like, yeah, it's a very, excuse my usage, it's a very horrible day in terms of the way my other days go, but it's still a very good day compared to, like, I still woke up with food, I still woke up with health, I still, you know what I'm saying? Like, I woke up stressed out, but I still had a meal, I still had shelter, you know what I'm saying? And I still made it to work fine. It's good, I'm good. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah. And my other question, I had another question. for you,
Go ahead.
was, when you mentioned that these kind of instances can kill the heart,
Mm-hmm.
so I
The excessive joking, laughter,
excessive joking,
and even the
gratification,
yeah.
backbiting, where it kind of hardens the heart, or even
Mhm.
completely sees it from spiritual connection with Allah.
Mm-hmm.
So I think about kind of my own development of my heart. So when I mean, I was a convert before, and even before that, I was participating in these kind of behaviors. And I think about, okay, so how deep, I mean, it was.
Did you say I was a convert before? Is that what you
I
said?
mean, yeah, I converted to Islam.
Okay.
So I think about when I participated in these kind of things, how can, I mean, if it killed the heart, harden the heart, how can, what, I mean, there has to be some sort of process where you're, you're developed in these kind of
Mhm.
behaviors, and somehow you become Muslim, and now someone's like trying to study more about it.
So-
Like, I'm wondering how can someone go from this kind of deep path and then like just like slingshot the other way.
Well, it shows that there was, you or anyone in your situation, that although there was excessive laughter or a lot of these things were happening, right? There was still, it wasn't to a point, even though you might think so, it wasn't to a point where it was, the heart was completely corrupted and there was a sincerity in the heart, right? Or a desire for the truth in the heart that was still overpowering those other things. Right? So as much as those other things were, there was a level of sincerity or a desire to seek the truth or a desire just to be good, right? That was still overpowering the heart.
Thereby, and this means that you can never know someone's like intention.
Oh, you
Even
can,
though people
yeah.
participate in this,
Huh?
Even though people maybe
Even though people participate in this, right? We're not in the business of even if, like, let's say, Maz just was like a guy who just joked and laughed all the time, right? There might be an apparent image that I get of him, like the guy's not serious, the guy's kind of like always joking, doesn't use his time beneficially. But I can't make a judgment on his heart, right? Because that's something that is between him and Allah, right? Because I might see Maz, right, in class, and he's just joking 24/7, right? And this is something I think I mentioned last week or the week before. He's joking 24/7, right? And you see Maz only at the masjid. That's the only place you see him. You don't interact with him. All you do is you see him pray. And when you see him pray, it's like you're like, man, this guy prays like a companion, just like serious in prayer. So I have this image of him, right, where it's just, dude's just a joker, foolish person. You have this image of him where like he's a companion, right? But the only true image of him is the image that Allah has of him and that relationship that he has with Allah. Like how he is outside of the classroom and outside of the masjid, I don't know and you don't know because we don't see him, right? So that's between him and Allah. Like that's that private relationship, that's that state of his heart. That make sense? So we don't ever get into what is the person's intention or what is the person's state of the heart. We good? Yeah, all right. We'll see you all next week. Next week is our last week before Ramadan break. So next week is week 5. Yeah, we get a month off to work on purification. Yeah, it's built into the class, right? Right, and then after that we'll continue. وصلى اللهم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.